This is Dominissimo Voxlore, broadcasting from the heart of the rock through cryptic codes etched before the Fall of Caliban. In this transmission, we cast open the sanctum of the Unforgiven, the Dark Angels, first of the Emperor's sons, and most burdened by shame. From their birth as the First Legion to secrets buried beneath shattered Caliban, from the shadow war of the Hunt to the return of the Lion himself. This is a tale of warriors armoured in pride, bound by silence, and consumed by a truth they dare not share. Seal your place within the inner circle, strike the mark of subscription, or vanish into exile with the rest of the fallen. Steel your mind, guard your soul, and prepare yourself for the legacy of the First Legion. This is Dominissimo, and this is the lore of the Dark Angels. In the earliest age of the Imperium, before the Primarchs were found, before the Crusade swept across the stars, there was the First Legion. They were not yet Dark Angels. They were simply the Emperor's first, prototype warriors created to define what it meant to be an Astartes. Their birth marked the dawn of a new kind of war, a cold and clinical extermination of all that defied the will of the Emperor. The First Legion was forged on Terra, drawn from the fragmented and war-scarred peoples of Earth in the closing days of the Unification Wars. These early aspirants were recruited from a wide spectrum of cultures: nomads, hive dwellers, gene clans, and eventually the genetically enhanced Thunder Warriors who had survived the early battles of Unification. Each was stripped of their identity, their language, even their names. In place of old allegiances, they were given new ones. The warriors of the First Legion took on these titles from ancient Terra myth and legend, names with no direct meaning to their battles, but loaded with gravitas and ritual, a symbolic rebirth. From the beginning, the First Legion stood apart. They were the Emperor's testbed for technology, strategy, and doctrine. War gear considered too experimental or too dangerous for other proto-legions was handed freely to them. They fought with plasma weapons, volatile atomantic warheads, and even relics of the dark age of technology that others would never see. Some whispered they had access to forbidden archaeotech, devices capable of altering reality itself, vortex weapons, gene phages, or weapons that turn living flesh to glass. They entered battle clad in grey ceramite, adorned only by the skeletal visage of Death's Head, an image that would later become an enduring symbol of the Astartes. Their armour bore no livery, no heraldry, only function and finality. In those days, they were simply known as the Angels of Death, and for many, they were the first contact with the Emperor's vision of conquest. The First Legion's debut on the battlefield came during the final purge of the Old Knight's techno-barbarian remnants. At the siege of the Himalayan fortress, the Emperor deployed the entirety of the First Legion in a coordinated strike alongside the last of the Thunder Warriors and his custodians. In the aftermath, where once stood a continent-spanning bastion of resistance, there was only ash and silence. The First Legion had arrived. But their true proving ground came with the siege of Samarkand, a campaign that tested the Legion's unity and raw power. There, they faced a force of over 2,000 gene-forged warriors bred in pre-imperial labs, monstrosities fused with machine and malevolent will. The First Legion, numbering barely 10,000 at the time, met the Horde in open battle. They did not falter. They did not break. In a single solar cycle, the enemy was annihilated. Their leader, a warlord known as Garl Greyhowl, was personally executed by the Legion's master, Hector Thrain. The battle cemented the First Legion's status. Their tactics were ruthless, their strategy absolute. Where they marched, compliance followed, or extinction. During this era, the First Legion was organised into flexible brotherhoods known as hosts. These formations were loosely aligned around martial philosophies. Some favoured heavy assault, others terror tactics. Some deployed ancient alchemical weapons to render entire ecosystems uninhabitable. The hosts operated autonomously but with unity of purpose. It is said that up to 18 hosts existed at the height of their pre-Primarch strength, each one a laboratory for war. The Emperor entrusted the First Legion with tasks others could not, or would not, perform. They were sent where diplomacy failed, where resistance was absolute. Their missions were rarely recorded in public archives. Many compliant actions they led were erased, purged not just in fire but from memory. The Legion developed a reputation among other Imperial forces as cold, silent and unstoppable. Regiments of the Imperial Army whispered that to see a First Legion strike cruiser enter orbit was to see judgment incarnate. But not all was glory. As the other legions began to form, guided by emerging Primarchs, the First Legion remained unclaimed. Their traditions, honed through Terran dogma, began to ossify. Hosts that had once shared doctrine now guarded secrets, competing for resources and status. Innovation stalled. What had begun as adaptability turned to arrogance. They were, after all, the first. the template. Many believed they needed no Primarch, no refinement, only purpose. It was at the Battle of Canis Balor that this pride was broken. There, the Legion faced an unknown Xenos race whose war forms adapted to their weapons and tactics in real time. The First Legion suffered catastrophic losses. Unable to defeat the alien foe conventionally, they were forced to withdraw and enact exterminatus upon the planet, a last resort they had never needed before. In that defeat, Grandmaster Thrain was slain. His death left a power vacuum within the Legion, and the fragile cohesion between hosts began to crack. In the aftermath, commanders debated the future. Some called for reforms, others demanded autonomy. Without the guidance of a Primarch, the First Legion found itself drifting. Still powerful, still feared, but no longer peerless. Their numbers grew, but their soul dimmed. The Emperor, ever the strategist, waited. He did not chastise the First Legion, nor did he replace Thrain hastily. Instead, he gave them time to reflect, to consider the weight of the honour they bore, and then, when the moment was right, he summoned them to muster at the edge of Segmentum Obscurus. There, the Emperor revealed what the First Legion had been missing: a name, a purpose, a Primarch. But before they became Dark Angels, they were the Emperor's Black Blade, the silent architects of annihilation, the first into war and often the last to leave. In the dying embers of the old night, they were the cold hand of the Imperium's rebirth, and in the quiet spaces between stars, they began to build the legend that would one day both empower and curse them. They were the First Legion, and their war had only just begun. Across the warp-racked stars of the Imperium's expanding frontier, a summons echoed like a ripple through the skein of fate. The First Legion, battered by the long attrition of their solitary wars, received a command from the Emperor himself: journey to the distant world of Caliban. There, a Primarch awaited. Not just a commander, but a soul forged in darkness, a creature of myth shaped for war. The world of Caliban was not among the glittering stars of the Imperium's early conquests. It was a feral place, overgrown and forgotten, where the forest had consumed the ruins of a lost technological age. The surface was choked in monstrous vegetation and plagued by creatures of unnatural size and malign intellect. Humanity survived in fortress monasteries, small enclaves of nobility and knightly orders who lived in constant battle with the beasts of the wild. It was among these knightly orders that the Emperor's son was raised. He was called the Lion. Found as an infant in the deep wilds, the child had survived where no other could. Adopted by the Order, a humble but virtuous knightly brotherhood, he was given the name L. Johnson, the Lion, son of the forest. He grew in body and in mind with unnatural speed. By his teenage years, he towered over seasoned warriors, wielding blade and stratagem with equal ease. Charismatic, solitary, brilliant, yet somehow unreachable. The Lion united Caliban not with speeches, but with decisive action. He subdued rival orders, brought the beasts of the forest to heel, and laid siege to the deep, unnatural places of the world. Under his leadership, Caliban transformed from a cursed world to a bastion of hope. But even as the people revered him, the Lion remained distant, set apart by something even he could not name. It was then the Emperor came. Descending in radiant gold, the master of mankind found his lost son at last. The meeting was silent, profound. No witnesses recorded what passed between them, but all knew. The Lion had found his purpose. Without hesitation, Lionel Johnson knelt and pledged himself to the Great Crusade. With this, the First Legion was transformed. No longer would they fight alone, fragmented into aging hosts and rigid command hierarchies. The Emperor gave command of the Legion to the Lion without question, and his first act was to bind the host remnants into a new structure, one that reflected both his Calibanite upbringing and his unyielding pursuit for order. The Lion introduced a hierarchy built around secret knowledge and martial excellence. Brotherhoods became orders. Chains of command grew deeper, more specialised. Some were initiated into inner councils, privy to truths withheld from common legionaries. It was the beginning of what would later be called the Inner Circle, though at this stage it was less a conspiracy than a necessity, an apparatus to impose the Lion's will across a massive and fractured force. He gave his warriors new symbols: dark green for humility, bone white for death, wings for vigilance. These colours adorned their armour alongside the winged sword, a blade of purity and secrecy. The Legion took a new name, one whispered in awe across 1,000 war zones: the Dark Angels. The Legion's fusion with the Lion's knightly culture was not without friction. The Terran-born veterans, especially those from the old hosts, were wary of the Calibanite newcomers and the sudden influx of their customers and warriors. Likewise, the new recruits from Caliban viewed the older legionaries as relics. Effective, yes, but without soul or culture. The Lion tolerated this tension but would not allow it to interfere with war. He enforced unity through results, and the results were devastating. The Dark Angel surged through the galaxy, becoming one of the most feared and respected legions of the Crusade. The Lion, though young among his brothers, was gifted with an unparalleled instinct for war. He saw the strands of a battlefield before the first shot was fired. Whether commanding void warfare, armoured assault, or planetary sieges, the Lion executed each campaign with chilling efficiency. One of his earliest triumphs was the pacification of Sarosh, a world that had welcomed the Imperium under false pretenses. Beneath their words of compliance, the Saroshi had prepared to assassinate the Emperor himself. The Lion uncovered the plot through sharp intuition and ruthless analysis. He executed the planet's leaders, purged the cities, and reduced Sarosh to a smouldering ruin, all within hours of learning of the betrayal. For this, the Emperor offered no rebuke. He only nodded, pleased. Not all legions embraced the Dark Angel's rise. Some envied their speed and resources. Others feared their secrecy. The Raven Guard whispered that the Dark Angel saw loyalty as a scale, not an absolute. The Iron Warriors viewed their knightly traditions as archaic indulgence. Even the Ultramarines, paragons of order, found the Lion's methods opaque. Yet the Lion paid no heed to reputation. He did not court approval. He valued victory, not praise. Still, rivalry grew. Among the Primarchs, only a few understood the Lion. Rabuti Gilliman respected his administrative genius. Rogel Dawn acknowledged his strategic clarity. Horus, ever the politician, tried to build bridges, but found the Lion distant, unmoved by charm or hierarchy. And then there was Luthor. Luthor, once the Lion's closest companion on Caliban, had been uplifted into the Astartes by the Emperor's science. Though older, he now served as a subordinate commander within the Legion. At first, he bore this with pride. But as the campaigns wore on, he saw how the Lion grew colder, how the Legion became more secretive, how decisions once shared were now withheld. Seeds of discontent took root. Even as the Legion brought thousands of worlds into Imperial compliance, tensions simmered beneath the surface. The integration of Calibanite and Terran cultures remained incomplete. Rivalries between orders flared. Some within the Legion whispered of dark omens from Caliban's deep forests, ruins best left buried, beasts not yet extinct. The Lion ignored such things. He believed in forward momentum, in the Crusade, in the Emperor. And so, the Dark Angel became what they had always desired, a perfect weapon, sheathed in silence, guided by a hand no enemy could anticipate. But for all his mastery of war, the Lion did not see the darkness growing behind him. On Caliban, in Luthor, in the hearts of men taught that secrets are more sacred than truth. The Crusade marched on, and the Lion led from the front. He would win battle after battle, crush resistance in system after system. The First Legion, now reborn as the Dark Angels, seemed destined for eternal glory. But in their shadow, a fracture was beginning to form. And soon, the galaxy would bleed. With the Lion at their helm and the stars ripe for conquest, the Dark Angels surged outward into the darkness, a blade reborn for the Emperor's will. No longer fractured into uncoordinated hosts or tradition-bound orders, they had become a single, purpose-made war machine. If the unification wars on Terra had forged them and Caliban had refined them, the Great Crusade would prove them. They did not seek glory. They did not make speeches. They conquered. As the Imperium spread like wildfire through the Milky Way, the Dark Angels carved its foundations in blood and fire. The First Legion was deployed where resistance was stiffest, where diplomacy had failed, where Xenos empires stood defiant, where rebellions refused to yield. They became the scalpel and the hammer, the quiet destroyers of regimes too dangerous to be allowed submission. One such campaign was the devastation of Obelis. The Oblon technocracy had survived the long night by sequestering itself behind a network of artificial suns powered by enslaved warp entities. Negotiation had failed. The Ultramarines had attempted precision strikes and been repelled. Then came the Dark Angels. With no announcements or war horns, they darkened the artificial suns with boarding torpedoes and plasma bombs. The entire Oblon defense grid failed in under a day. The Legion's librarians, rare and elite in those days, nullified the warp-bound energy cores, and the planet fell into night. Within 72 hours, the technocracy was gone. No survivors, no rebellion. The First Legion did not celebrate victories in the way other legions did. There were no processions, no parades. Where the Blood Angels might paint the tale in song and verse, and the Lunar Wolves raise it in banners, the Dark Angels recorded their triumphs in silence, only for those within their own ranks to study. Each success was a stone placed upon a monument only they could see. But war changes all who fight it. As the Great Crusade continued, the cracks between the Legion's Terran and Calibanite cultures grew more visible. Though officially united, the two factions saw the galaxy through different lenses. The Terrans viewed the Crusade as a sacred duty, a final perfection of the old Legion model. For them, serving alongside the Lion was both burden and blessing. The Calibanites, however, were born into the legend of Lionel Johnson. To them, he was not just a commander, he was a myth incarnate. They followed not the Imperium, but the Lion himself. This tension simmered beneath the surface during the Thramas expansion, a years-long campaign to extinguish the Night Lord's growing power in the Eastern Fringe. Though the war with Conrad Kurz had not yet ignited in full, several border systems had fallen to the Night Lord's terror tactics. The Dark Angels were deployed to push back the Shadow. It was here that the Legion encountered the first signs that something was wrong with the unity of the Astartes. In the ruins of Vendrax Secundus, Dark Angel strike teams found evidence that the Night Lords were not acting alone, that their tactics, brutal as they were, mirrored those of Imperial compliance forces. Someone within the Imperium had supplied them. At the time, this was filed away, another enigma to be dissected in private, but it planted a seed of paranoia that would bloom in time. Meanwhile, the Lion's methods became ever more opaque. He often split his forces into independent task forces under trusted commanders. These cells operated with total autonomy, receiving only cryptic mission objectives and sealed orders. Most returned with their targets annihilated, their silence unbroken. Some never returned at all. This decentralisation gave the Dark Angels an advantage. They could fight on 10 fronts simultaneously, their foes never certain where the next strike would land. In the compliance of Yggnir Prime, 3 such cells executed a synchronised orbital strike, decapitating a ruling caste that had resisted Imperial compliance for centuries. In the aftermath, the planet fell into stunned silence, its people prostrating themselves before statues of the Lion they had never seen. During the Gravelax incursion, the Legion faced off against a splinter empire of human-machine hybrids, survivors of the Dark Age of technology who worshipped logic spirits and rejected the Emperor's truth. The Dark Angels adapted swiftly, deploying Terminator-clad shock units deep into enemy bunkers using teleportarium strikes. Within hours, the Cog Lords were exterminated, their data core temples dismantled. The hybrids' neural codes were archived, then promptly sealed by the Lion himself. Not even the Mechanicum was granted access. These victories gave the Dark Angels a reputation as the Legion that left nothing to chance. They were not brutish like the World Eaters, nor flamboyant like the Emperor's children. Their wars were precise, absolute, clinical, but that precision came at a price. Within the Legion, internal surveillance grew more common. Orders were sometimes countermanded without explanation. Squad leaders began receiving independent, secondary directives, often conflicting with primary mission goals. The Inner Circle, though not yet fully formed, was beginning to take shape. A web of secrets within secrets, all directed by the Lion and his chosen few. Many within the Legion accepted this as necessity. The galaxy, after all, was not clean. The Imperium's enemies wore many masks. It was not enough to win battles. The Dark Angels had to ensure that what they conquered could never rise again. Yet some chafed under this growing atmosphere of secrecy. Luthor, ever watchful from Caliban, wrote reports to the Lion warning of unrest among the Calibanite Astartes stationed at home. Their training continued, but many felt abandoned, used as little more than a recruitment reserve. They tamed Caliban. Should they not have a place at the front? The Lion, locked in void wars far from home, responded only with orders, his attention fixed on greater things. The last major campaign before the storm broke was the Shield of Belethor. Here, the Dark Angels faced an ancient Xenos empire, one of the last remnants of the Sloth, corpse-eating aliens whose mastery of necrotic technology had thwarted 3 full compliance fleets. The Lion devised a plan that baffled even his own officers. He allowed the Sloth to destroy 2 Dark Angel strike forces as bait, then used the psychic backlash from their deaths to track and isolate the Xenos command hive. What followed was genocide on a planetary scale. It was the final proof that no enemy, no matter how ancient, could stand before the First Legion. But not all enemies came from beyond. Within the void of silence, within the structure of secrecy and sacrifice, something old and terrible was growing. The Legion's strength was unmatched, their loyalty unquestioned. But trust, that was another matter. And as the Crusade entered its final years, the First Legion stood atop mountains of ash, victorious but watching every shadow. For soon, the shadows would begin watching back. The stars were burning with betrayal. Across the Imperium, brother turned on brother, and the heresy erupted like a festering wound long hidden beneath golden armour. But while Horus Lupercal struck at the heart of the Emperor's dream, the Dark Angels were far from Terra. Deployed on the eastern fringe, isolated by the machinations of warp storms, misinformation and fate. And so, the First Legion fought in the dark, unaware that the Imperium itself was bleeding to death. The Horus heresy shattered the unity of legions, but for the Dark Angels, the rupture was both external and internal. They were not at Istvan, they were not at Prospero or Calth. Their battlefields were different, their tragedy uniquely theirs. It began with silence. As the heresy unfolded, the Lion's fleets pushed forward, still prosecuting campaigns in the Thramas sector. At the edge of this bloody theatre, they clashed again and again with the Night Lords under the tormented Primarch Conrad Kurz. The war became personal. Kurz, a creature of madness and fatalism, saw in the Lion a rival cast from the same cold iron but without the capacity for understanding darkness. The Lion, for his part, viewed Kurz not as a tragic figure, but as a cancer to be excised. The Thramas Crusade was brutal and unrelenting. The Dark Angels engaged in ship-to-ship ambushes, surgical raids, and void battles that turned entire sectors into drifting graveyards. In one such battle, the Lion nearly captured Kurz aboard the Invincible Reason, the Legion's flagship, but the Night Haunter escaped, leaving behind slaughtered crew and blood-smeared prophecy. From this point on, the war became more than strategic. It was personal. Yet while this shadow war unfolded, the rest of the galaxy burned. Terra was under siege. Horus was making his final play. The Lion, desperate to return to the core worlds, was cut off by storms and deliberate sabotage. His fleet hounded by traitors, his own strategic silence contributing to the isolation. It would be years before the truth of the heresy reached the Dark Angels in full. When it did, it was too late. By the time the Lion learned of Horus's betrayal, the siege of Terra was over. The Emperor had struck down his favoured son at the cost of his own mortal form. The Great Crusade was ended. The Age of Reclamation was dead. All that remained was ruin. The Lion did not rage. He did not weep. He turned his eyes homeward. Caliban. During the Legion's long absence, the homeworld had changed. Once a bastion of loyalty and tradition, Caliban had grown bitter. Left to govern in the Lion's absence, Luthor, mentor, friend, and foster brother, had slowly turned from admiration to resentment. Whispers of betrayal had taken root among the Calibanite recruits. They were made Astartes, yes, but rarely given true command. Most were stationed on Caliban or used as garrison troops. Many believed the Terran-born officers still held them in contempt. Luthor, whether driven by ambition, bitterness, or the subtle influence of darker powers, began to question the Lion's vision. In private councils, he spoke of the Legion's soul being fractured, that Caliban was not a training ground, but a holy site, that the Legion should return, not to the Emperor, but to its origins. As the Lion's fleet approached Caliban, unaware of the magnitude of Luthor's growing treason, he expected a homecoming. What awaited him was war. Without warning, Caliban's orbital defence platforms opened fire on the returning fleet. The Invincible Reason, caught off guard, was critically damaged. Drop pods were launched, not in glory, but in desperation. The Dark Angels who descended upon their homeworld found it twisted. Ancient knightly keeps had been repurposed into fortress monasteries, bristling with anti-orbital weaponry. The forest once tame now seethed with warped taint, and the people, once loyal, had been filled with poisonous reverence for Caliban itself. The truth was revealed in fire and blood. Luthor had turned the planet against the Lion. The reasons for his betrayal had been debated for 10,000 years. Was it pride? Jealousy? A subtle corruption planted by the ruinous powers? Or did Luthor truly believe he was preserving Caliban from being consumed by a war the people never asked for? Whatever the cause, the outcome was inevitable. The Dark Angels launched a full assault on their own world. What followed was cataclysm. The fighting was apocalyptic. fortress monasteries that once trained neophytes now bristled with heavy weapons. Caliban Astartes, once sworn to the Lion, turned their bolters on their brothers. Entire chapters of the Legion were torn apart in intestine slaughter. The Lion, grim and silent, led the assault personally, carving his way through the heart of the resistance toward Luthor's final bastion, the Tower of Angels. Their final confrontation is the stuff of myth and silence. The Lion fought Luthor alone, far beneath the tower, in chambers once reserved for prayer and contemplation. No transcript survives, no witnesses tell the tale. All that is known is when the battle ended, the tower lay shattered, and the planet began to die. Luthor, broken in body and mind, was found raving, screaming that he had killed the Lion, that the Lion had finally seen the truth, that the Emperor had abandoned them all. The Lion was gone, vanished. Some believe he was mortally wounded by Luthor and entombed deep within the shattered core of Caliban. Others claim he was spirited away by the Emperor's will. The truth is buried beneath secrecy, guarded by the inner circle and hidden even from many within the chapter itself. And Caliban, it died. The warp, drawn to the cataclysm, tore the world asunder. Vast sections were obliterated, sucked into the immaterium. What remained was a debris-choked husk. Only one structure survived intact, the Tower of Angels, which became the new fortress monastery of the Dark Angels. The ship now called the Rock, a floating citadel that drifted among the stars, bearing the heart of a world that had betrayed itself. But not all traitors were slain. In the collapse, many of the rebels vanished. Some, it is said, were swallowed by the warp. Others fled into its depths. These survivors would become known by a name that would haunt the chapter forever: the Fallen. Thus ended the heresy for the Dark Angels, not in the burning spires of Terra, but in the shattered bones of their own homeworld. Their grief was not the grief of loss, but of betrayal. Their shame was not merely Luthor's, but their own. From this point on, the Dark Angels became something more than a legion. They became a brotherhood of secrets, a monastic order bound by silent vows. Outwardly, they remained loyal servants of the Emperor. Inwardly, they carried a burden too terrible to speak. Their Primarch was gone. Their home was destroyed. Their legion was broken. And their hunt had only just begun. In the wake of Caliban's annihilation, the Dark Angels were no longer what they once were. Their homeworld reduced to ruin, their Primarch vanished, and their legion torn by betrayal. They emerged from the heresy not as conquerors or defenders, but as silent watchers, burdened by a secret too heavy to share. The Imperium looked upon them as heroes. They had not turned traitor. Their battle record remained untarnished. They were not present for the siege of Terra, but many legions had been absent, lost in warp storms, diverted by Horus's schemes. No questions were asked, no accusations made, but within the surviving ranks of the Dark Angels, there was only silence. For they alone knew the truth. The Lion was gone, Luthor had betrayed them, and the Fallen were loose in the warp. These were not abstract failures. The Fallen were their brothers, Astartes of the First Legion who had once marched beneath the same banners, trained in the same fortress monasteries, shared the same victories. Now, they were traitors, cast into the immaterium, scattered across time and space. Some had returned willingly, others had been deceived. A few might have acted out of desperation or misplaced loyalty, but none could be allowed to remain. To reveal the existence of the Fallen would risk the integrity of the entire chapter. If the truth were known, that an unknown number of Dark Angels would turn against the Imperium, not during the heresy but at its end, then the loyalty of the entire chapter would be called into question. The Dark Angels would be declared heretics. The Inquisition would purge them. Everything would be lost. Thus began the Second War of the Dark Angels, a war of secrecy and shadows, a war against their own past. The Inner Circle was formalised in this era. Once a loose web of commanders and trusted confidants, it became a rigid hierarchy of knowledge. At the top were those who knew the full truth, the events of Caliban, the fate of the Lion, the existence of the Fallen. Beneath them were layers of initiates, each granted information as necessary, and no more. To the wider chapter, the Dark Angels appeared unchanged. They continued to prosecute the wars of the Imperium with their characteristic precision and fury. They maintained recruitment, rebuilt their strength, and established successor chapters during the Second Founding. But these were unforgiven chapters, the Angels of Absolution, Angels of Redemption, Angels of Vengeance, and others, were not ordinary successors. They were bound by oaths known only to the Inner Circle, carrying the same secret shame, the same hidden mission. Each of the Unforgiven was granted fragments of the truth. Each had its own inner circle, and each was bound to one goal: the hunt. The search for the fallen became an obsession, not a crusade, not a campaign, but a permanent state of being. Across the galaxy, the Dark Angels began compiling records of unexplained warp phenomena, mysterious disappearances, sightings of green armoured Astartes with no chapter markings. They established listening posts, interrogation cells, and psychic surveillance networks. Every war zone became a potential hunting ground, every conflict an opportunity. When the Dark Angels appeared unexpectedly on a battlefield, diverting from their assigned campaigns, refusing to coordinate with Imperial forces, it was often because they received word of a possible fallen sighting. Entire war efforts were abandoned for the sake of pursuing one target. Whole regiments of the Astra Militarum were left unsupported, sacrificed to maintain secrecy. Capture was the objective, not execution. The fallen would be taken alive, if possible, and brought to the Rock for judgment. There, beneath the ruined Tower of Angels, were the secret dungeons known only to the Deathwing. The interrogator chaplains, armed not just with relics of faith but with terrible knowledge, would seek redemption, or confession, through any means necessary. The results were rarely spoken of. Some fallen repented, some died cursing the Lion's name. Others revealed nothing, their minds broken or twisted by centuries adrift in the warp. But everyone captured brought the chapter closer to some invisible threshold, a penance that could not be defined, only pursued. This secret war was not without cost. Over time, whispers began to spread, among other chapters, among inquisitors, among rogue elements of the Mechanicus, rumours of the Dark Angels appearing and vanishing without explanation, of mysterious Astartes in black robes interrogating loyal servants of the Emperor, of entire war zones cleansed of Imperial forces after the Dark Angels' departure. The Inquisition, particularly the Ordo Hereticus and Ordo Malleus, grew suspicious. Questions were asked, surveillance increased. In some cases, the Dark Angels' own allies became liabilities, forced to be silenced, or at best, excluded from key operations. Still, the hunt continued. One of the earliest confirmed captures of a fallen occurred on the Forge world of Distra, where a Dark Angel named Astellan had been found posing as a warlord and advisor to a heretical cult. Astellan had once been a respected Terran-born officer during the Great Crusade, a veteran of 100 campaigns. Now, he stood defiant before the interrogator chaplains, claiming that it was not he who betrayed the Imperium, but the Lion. The hunt spread into the warp itself. The Dark Angels began working with elements of the Ordo Zinus and Navus Nobiliae to chart warp rifts and temporal anomalies. They scoured demon worlds, derelict ships, and ghost systems. Time itself became unreliable. Some fallen had aged millennia, while others were unchanged since the fall. Throughout the 41st millennium, the hunt grew more dangerous. Chaos became more aggressive. Abaddon launched his Black Crusades. Hive fleets stirred in the dark between galaxies. The Imperium groaned under its own weight. And still, the Dark Angels refused to relent. Even as the galaxy fell into madness, they stayed the course. They bore the Lion's silence. They carried Caliban's ghost. And they hunted. This was their penance, not because they had failed the Emperor, but because they had failed themselves. The First Legion, the exemplar of loyalty and order, had cracked at the core. And now, they would spend 10,000 years trying to repair that fracture, one fallen at a time. No banners marked this war, no triumphs were declared. It was fought in the shadows, behind masks, beneath hoods. The hunt was never discussed openly, only the inner circle knew its shape. To everyone else, the Dark Angels remained what they had always been, the Emperor's fist. But in the silence between wars, in the whispering corridors of the Rock, in the dreams of the interrogator chaplains, a single truth remained. The fallen are out there, and we will find them all. A chapter does not survive 10,000 years by strength alone. The Dark Angels endured not through sheer force of arms, but by perfecting the art of secrecy. In the centuries that followed the fall of Caliban, they became more than a fighting force. They became a monastic order, a brotherhood bound not only by blood and battle, but by silence and ritual. The hunt for the fallen remained paramount, but it could not consume the entirety of the chapter's purpose, not publicly. To the wider Imperium, the Dark Angels remained dutiful warriors, always reliable, always precise. They responded to war zones with grim resolve. They honed the Codex Astartes, at least outwardly, and kept pace with their brother chapters. But behind this veneer, the First Legion evolved into something far more insular, even among their peers. Following the second founding, when the surviving legions were broken into smaller chapters, the Dark Angels did not splinter, they multiplied. Chapters like the Angels of Absolution, Angels of Vengeance, and Angels of Redemption were born from the same seed, infused with the same mission. Each would bear their own name, heraldry, and worlds, but each would also keep the secret. These chapters became known collectively as the Unforgiven. While other successor chapters were often cut loose to chart their own destinies, the Unforgiven remained closely tethered. They communicated through secure astropathic channels, met in shadow conclaves aboard the Rock, and shared intelligence on fallen sightings across the galaxy. If one chapter captured a fallen, the prisoner would be turned over to the Dark Angels. If one died in battle, his secrets would be interred with ceremony and silence. This sprawling network allowed the Dark Angels to extend their reach far beyond the borders of their own recruitment worlds. Each Unforgiven chapter acted as a node in a web stretching across the Imperium, bound not just by loyalty to the Emperor, but to the Lion and the secret war he left behind. This was not without cost. The secrecy required to maintain the hunt began to isolate the Unforgiven from the rest of the Adeptus Astartes. While the Ultramarines established inter-chapter academies, and the Space Wolves forged bonds through shared campaigns, the Dark Angels grew increasingly withdrawn. They accepted aid rarely. They gave none in return without clear strategic benefit. Their allies found them cryptic, and their actions, especially their sudden withdrawals or refusals to engage, often raised suspicion. Over time, the Inner Circle's influence grew. It began to dictate more than just the hunt. Promotions were no longer purely based on valour or achievement, but on perceived strength of will, resistance to temptation, and unwavering discretion. Interrogator chaplains watched closely. Librarians were screened more thoroughly than in any other chapter. Only the most trusted were ever told the truth. At the centre of this web stood the Supreme Grand Master, chosen by the Inner Circle to lead not just the chapter, but the entire Unforgiven Brotherhood. He was both general and abbot, responsible not just for warfare, but for doctrine, secrecy, and penance. One such Grand Master was Belial, a stoic warrior who rose through the Deathwing ranks during the Malachor incursion. Another was Saphon, a dour interrogator chaplain who expanded the Order's covert intelligence network. But perhaps the most enduring leader was Azrael. Azrael, the Supreme Grand Master in the later years of the 41st millennium, became a symbol of the modern Dark Angels. Wise, unyielding, and patient beyond measure, Azrael carried the Watcher's helm, the helm once worn by the Lion himself, and wielded the Lion's wrath, a mastercrafted combi plasma of ancient making. He led the chapter through some of its most trying eras: the Gothic War, the rise of the 13th Black Crusade, and the dark resurgence of the Warp. But Azrael's greatest burden was maintaining the unity of the Unforgiven. Each chapter had its own culture, its own interpretation of the hunt, and its own scars from 10 millennia of secrecy. Some, like the Angels of Absolution, believed themselves already cleansed, bearing no guilt for Caliban's fall. Others, like the Angels of Vengeance, embraced fanatical zealotry, attacking any enemy, real or imagined, that bore the taint of betrayal. Keeping these chapters in line required political skill, spiritual authority, and absolute control of information. Azrael mastered all three. Under his stewardship, the interrogator chaplaincy flourished. Captured fallen were extracted with surgical precision. The flow of heretical data was tightly regulated. Even rumours among the Deathwing were crushed before they could spread. Yet even Azrael could not halt all dissent. In the 41st millennium, a whisper began to circulate among the Unforgiven, that some of the fallen had begun to gather, not simply drifting through the warp or hiding on backwater worlds, but organising, gathering power, preparing. These rumours traced a cipher. The name was ancient, predating the heresy, once held by the Master of the Order back on Caliban. But the figure now bore the title was something else entirely. Clad in black armour and wielding a masterwork bolt pistol and plasma weapon, Cypher moved like a ghost across the stars. He fought demons, he rescued Imperial commanders, he toppled heretical warlords, and yet he was hunted by the Dark Angels with greater fervour than any other. To the Inner Circle, Cypher was the key, the enigma upon which the future of the chapter might turn. Some believed he sought the Emperor's throne, to deliver a message or a weapon. Others feared he was a herald of ruin, leading the fallen in secret. Whatever the truth, his presence marked a shift. The hunt was no longer about scattered traitors hiding in shadows. It was becoming a reckoning. The Dark Angels tightened their operations. More resources were funneled into astropathic surveillance, psychic scrying, and data harvesting from Mechanicus archives. Entire battle groups were reassigned to investigations. Imperial authorities were lied to. Lives were sacrificed, all to find Cypher. And yet, he slipped through their grasp again and again. The hunt became something more than penitence. It was a spiral, a labyrinth with no end. In the solitude of their floating fortress, the Rock, the Dark Angels prepared for what they could not name. Chaplains preached sermons of judgment, librarians combed forgotten prophecies. Watchers in the dark, mute hooded figures of unknown origin, began to appear with greater frequency, lingering near the Lion's sealed resting place. Their presence was never explained. The Chapter did not sleep, the Unforgiven did not forget, and across the Imperium, war drums began to beat once more. The galaxy was changing, and the First Legion, wrapped in shadow and iron, was ready to meet it. The stars trembled as the Eye of Terra bled fire into the galaxy. Abaddon the Despoiler, War Master of Chaos, launched his 13th Black Crusade, a full-scale assault upon the Segmentum Obscurus with one goal: to tear down the Cadian Gate and open the path to Terra itself. It was a campaign not just of military devastation, but of psychic entropy. The veil between realities thinned, demons howled in the void. The Imperium, long fractured by war and complacency, stood on the edge of annihilation. And in the shadows, the Dark Angels moved. To the outside world, they arrived on Cadia as reinforcements, stoic, silent, and utterly efficient. They brought with them entire strike forces of Deathwing and Ravenwing, elite companies whose names were spoken with awe or suspicion depending on who recounted their deeds. Azrael himself, the Supreme Grand Master, took personal command of the Chapter's operations in the region. Alongside him stood Ezekiel, the Chief Librarian and Keeper of the Book of Salvation, whose visions had spoken of this war decades before it began. But the truth behind their arrival was more complicated. They had received word of a fallen. Not just a whisper or scattered rumour, but a confirmed sighting. A former brother of the First Legion, now in the service of Chaos, seen coordinating war bands on the outskirts of the Cadian defence network. This wasn't coincidence. The Dark Angels believed it was deliberate, a provocation, a challenge. Their hunt and the war collided in a storm of ruin. As Abaddon's forces surged across the Cadian sector, the Dark Angels operated in parallel to the Astra Militarum and the other Adeptus Astartes. They took assignments, yes, but they altered them when necessary. Entire deployments were redirected without explanation. A campaign meant to secure a munitions depot would suddenly become a full strike against a minor Chaos Cult enclave, because that enclave held a fragment of a cipher. A bridgehead operation would turn into a diversionary assault while a secret Ravenwing squad hunted a lone power-armoured figure escaping through a warp breach. Imperial commanders noticed. Many resented it. But the Dark Angels gave nothing in return except results. Where they were deployed, the enemy died. Where they struck, the advance of the arch-enemy stalled. They fought like warriors possessed, their precision bordering on the preternatural. Yet all the while, their true battle raged in silence. Interrogations conducted aboard the Rock, fragments of heretical data recovered and analysed, and among them all, one name spoken with growing dread: Cypher. The infamous fugitive re-emerged in the chaos of the 13th Black Crusade, not leading armies, but slipping between them. He was seen aiding retreating Cadians, destroying Chaos supply lines, even killing a minor demon prince with a relic blade. But no one could say whose side he was truly on. The Dark Angels knew better than to ask. For them, his appearance was not a boon, it was a wound reopened. When Cadia itself finally fell, shattered by the Despoiler's Blackstone-powered weaponry and consumed in the warp's ravenous tide, the Dark Angels were among the last to withdraw. Their fleet, operating independently, evacuated not civilians or high command, but relics, data cores, individuals marked by the inner circle for extraction. Some were tortured, others were memory wiped, all disappeared into the bowels of the Rock, never seen again. And still, Cypher evaded them. Azrael's frustration was kept behind a calm mask, but those closest to him saw the signs. The Supreme Grand Master had believed that Cadia would be the turning point, that the truth of the fallen, and perhaps even redemption, could be found amid the ruin. Instead, they had lost their prey again. But worse was coming. The fall of Cadia did more than fracture Imperial defences, it tore open reality. The Great Rift split the galaxy in two, birthing the Cicatrix Maledictum. Warp storms now bisected worlds, separated sectors, and isolated chapters from their home systems. Millions died in the first few days. Thousands of astropathic beacons went dark. Even the Astronomicon flickered. For the Dark Angels, this was an existential threat. The hunt relied on information, secrecy, coordination across the Unforgiven. Now, half the successor chapters were unreachable. The rock itself, drifting near the Maelstrom, found itself besieged by demonic manifestations spilling from the rift's edge. Warp echoes rang through the ancient stone. The watchers in the dark grew agitated, and beneath the sealed vaults where the lion lay, something stirred. Amid this turmoil, a messenger came. Not a vox call or encoded signal, but a man. Cypher. He appeared aboard the rock without explanation, captured in the middle of a Terran-bound pilgrimage route with a cohort of strange companions. With him, he carried a weapon wrapped in stasis chains, a blade some claim was the lion sword itself. He said nothing of its origin. When interrogated, he spoke only in riddles and questions. The inner circle was torn. Some believed he carried a message, others believed he carried doom. Regardless, Cypher was placed in the deepest cell of the rock, guarded by psychic wards and the most faithful of the Watchers. He did not stay. Exactly how Cypher escaped remains unknown. Every surveillance room failed, every lock remained sealed. One moment he was present, the next, gone. No alarms, no trace. In the wake of his escape, psychic disturbances swept the rock. Chaplains reported dreams of winged figures cloaked in ash. The librarians felt a tremor, not in the warp, but in something older. And in the sealed chamber where the lion lay entombed, faint motes of light began to swirl. But none spoke of it. Azrael ordered a renewed hunt. All forces were recalled. The Unforgiven entered a state of heightened readiness. Every asset was repurposed. Every world suspecting of harbouring the Fallen was marked for surveillance or strike. The 13th Black Crusade had shattered the galaxy, yes, but it had also reignited the hunt. The Dark Angels emerged from that cataclysm not broken, but sharpened. The Imperium was wounded, but the First Legion had never been closer to its prey. The whispers surrounding the lion grew louder. Some said the Emperor stirred. Some said the old truth would soon be undone. And in the void between truth and treachery, the Dark Angels tightened their grip. For the galaxy was on fire, and in the fire, they would find the Fallen. For 10,000 years, the First Legion carried on without their Primarch. The wound left by the Fall of Caliban never closed, it only deepened, festered, and shaped everything the Dark Angels became. They hunted their own across the stars, guarding a shame no outsider could know, answering to an unspoken vow that no brother would rest until the last of the Fallen were brought to judgment. They called themselves the Unforgiven. And then, without warning, the lion returned. He did not descend in glory or emerge in triumphant horns. He awoke in silence, buried deep within the rock, where his shattered body had lain since the final moments of Caliban. Watched over by the enigmatic Watchers of the Dark, Lionel Johnson stirred in the dark hours of the Imperium's greatest crisis, the Era Indomitus. The galaxy was broken. The Great Rift had torn the Imperium in half. Abaddon's Arcs of Omen burned from one star system to the next. Vashtor the Archifane had launched a direct assault on the rock itself, and amid that chaos, the Primarch of the First Legion rose. But the lion who emerged was not the same figure lost at the dawn of the Imperium. The centuries had changed him. His resolve had hardened into something colder, quieter. Clad in ancient relic armour and bearing the sword fealty, the lion did not rejoin his sons immediately. Instead, he walked alone through the darkness of the Imperium Nihilus, a wandering knight appearing where hope had already fled. He became a myth in real time, appearing on war-torn worlds, aiding desperate defenders, then vanishing again into legend. In this silent crusade, the lion found allies, though not the ones anyone expected. Among those who stood with him were some of the Fallen, warriors cast out during the destruction of Caliban, scattered through space and time by the warp storm that shattered their world. Some had clung to their loyalty, others had simply survived. The lion, recognising the truth in their heads, did the unthinkable. He accepted them. The first was Zabrael, once a Dark Angel, cast into the abyss during the Legion's fall, a brother who had endured torment, betrayal, and exile, and who still held faith. When he met the lion again, Zabrael did not fight. He knelt. And the lion, without ceremony or hesitation, allowed him to rise. This act would fracture everything the Dark Angels believed. For 10 millennia, the Fallen had been the embodiment of shame, hunted without mercy, judged without exception. But the lion saw a deeper truth. Not all who were cast into the warp were traitors. Not all who bore the mark of Caliban's fall had chosen it. Some had resisted, some had suffered, and some had remained loyal. The Primarch's authority was absolute. He did not ask permission, he did not debate, he simply judged. And for the first time in the chapter's history, a fallen was accepted, not as a prisoner, but as a brother. This quiet revelation did not halt the hunt. The Unforgiven continued their vigil, the Inner Circle convened in secret, interrogations persisted, and the Book of Salvation remained open. But a new precedent had been set. The path of penance was no longer sealed. Under the Lion's eyes, redemption had become possible. When the Lion finally returned to the rock, it was not with a legion behind him, but with a message etched in steel and blood. The past cannot be buried, it must be faced. Even with the Lion's return, the past does not vanish, it sharpens. For 10,000 years, the Dark Angels and their Unforgiven successors had built a labyrinth of silence. A fortress of secrecy that not even Inquisitors, not even Guilliman, had truly penetrated. Every betrayal buried, every truth compartmentalised. It had preserved them, it had protected the hunt. But it had also rotted them from within. The Primarch's reawakening was a miracle, and a catalyst. As whispers of the Lion's return spread through the inner tiers of the Unforgiven, old certainties began to fracture. For centuries, the inner circles of each successor chapter had operated in relative autonomy, interpreting the hunt in their own ways, enforcing their doctrines with differing levels of zealotry or discretion. Now, that autonomy was in question. What does it mean to serve a Primarch reborn? Is the Supreme Grand Master of the Dark Angel still the final word? What of the chaplains who have interrogated hundreds of fallen without answers? The Watchers? The secrets even the Inner Circle cannot explain? And beneath all of it, a darker question. What if we were wrong? It began subtly. In the Angels of Vengeance, a schism broke out among senior officers regarding the continued use of purging protocols on worlds where fallen were rumoured to have passed through. A company captain refused to enact orbital cleansing on a hive moon believed to have harboured a traitor Astartes. He argued that the risk of exposing the chapter's actions now outweighed the value of secrecy. He was silenced, his name scrubbed from record. But the doubt had already spread. In the Angels of Redemption, 2 interrogated chaplains disappeared. The official line declared they had been lost in warp transit. The truth, discovered later by a Raven Wing recon force, was that they had attempted to defect, to deliver captured intelligence about the fallen to the Order Hereticus. They were captured, executed, and erased. Again, nothing changed, outwardly. But the circle had been breached. The Lion, though aware of these tremors, did not react as some had feared. He did not strike down the Inner Circle or dissolve the Unforgiven. He did not purge the impure. Instead, he did what he'd always done. He watched. He judged. And when he acted, it was swift and absolute. On the dead world of Ormit 4, a conclave of Unforgiven chapters met in secret. High-ranking members from the Dark Angels, Angels of Absolution, and the Angels of Vigilance assembled to discuss the future of the hunt in light of the Primarch's return. Some argued for opening parts of the truth to Guilliman. Others proposed merging the inner circles under a single unified command, an unbroken line beneath the Lion himself. But others resisted. Proud warriors, old even by Astartes standards, declared that the hunt was sacred, that none but the chapter could be trusted. That secrecy was not a burden, it was their penance. The argument grew heated. Then the Lion arrived. No ceremony, no procession. He walked into the chamber alone, clad in black and green, his sword at his back. The room fell silent. Warriors who had seen 10,000 years of war bowed their heads like children. And the Lion spoke. He did not condemn, he did not praise. He told them the truth. He told them that Caliban's fall was a shared failure, not just of Luthor, not just of the traitors, but of him. That his own silence, his own distance, had sown the seeds of resentment. He told them that the hunt was righteous, but it had become obsession. That secrecy had preserved the Legion, but it had also twisted it. He told them that the time for masks was ending. There would be no public revelation. The Imperium was not ready, but within the Unforgiven, things would change. The circle would tighten. Each chapter would reaffirm its oath, not to the silence, but to the new truth. New interrogator chaplains would be trained under revised doctrine. The Deathwing would be reorganised to deploy not just as strike units, but as judge and jury when heretical deviation was suspected within their own ranks. More controversially, the Lion decreed that certain Primaris officers, those who had proven themselves in the Pariah Nexus and Niflheim front, would be granted access to the outer levels of the Inner Circle. This caused uproar, but the Lion held firm.
Do you think loyalty only exists in those who share our shame?
He asked.
Then you have not learned from our failure.
Still, the tension could not be fully soothed. The Lion's return brought strength, yes, but also memory. Not every Unforgiven chapter had fared equally in the hunt. Some, like the Angels of Absolution, had captured dozens of Fallen. Others had failed, some claiming never to have encountered one in centuries. Azrael, ever loyal, now found himself in a strange place. He remained Supreme Grand Master, but his command had become layered with another authority, his Gene Father, reborn and commanding respect no title could match. The two did not clash, but their dynamics shifted. Azrael became the sword, the Lion became the compass. No longer was every Fallen a target. Now, they were pieces on a board. Some were dangerous, others useful. One or two, perhaps, redeemable. It was a terrifying idea, but the circle held. For the first time in millennia, the Unforgiven moved forward not out of guilt, but out of choice. And above them all, the Lion watched, not with fury, but with clarity. The circle had broken, but it had also reformed, and now it was stronger than ever. 10,000 years. That is the span of silence the Dark Angels have carried. 10,000 years of shadowed war, of whispered sins and cloaked crusades. Through the rise and fall of sectors, through the death of gods and rebirth of legends, they have remained ever watchful, ever silent. Now, in the twilight of the Imperium's longest night, the First Legion steps forward, not as martyrs, not as victims, but as the Unforgiven. From the forges of Terra they were born, first among the Astartes, shaped in the crucible of the Great Crusade. Before the galaxy even knew what it feared, the First Legion was its blade. Before the Primarchs were found, the Dark Angels bled for a dream no one could name. They were strength without legacy, loyalty without lineage. And then came the Lion. Lionel Johnson, hunter, warrior, philosopher, paradox. His arrival changed everything. He gave the Legion purpose, culture, pride, but also, unknowingly, he planted the seeds of ruin. The Fall of Caliban would mark the beginning of a fracture so profound that not even millennia could mend it. The heresy passed, but for the Dark Angels, its wounds never healed. The Fallen became their shame, their burden, and ultimately, their obsession. For thousands of years, while other chapters built empires of valour, the Dark Angels built vaults of silence. They founded successors, not for glory, but for surveillance. The Unforgiven spread across the stars not as beacon bearers, but as sentinels in the dark, sworn to a cause they dared not explain. They became executioners, judges, confessors, and in that long silence, something essential was lost. Not their honour, not their might, but their clarity. They became haunted. But the galaxy does not wait for healing. As the Imperium burned, the Dark Angels endured. Through Black Crusades and Necron Awakenings, through Hive fleets and demonic incursions, they never faltered. Even as they were distrusted, by the Inquisition, by fellow Astartes, they remained unyielding. And when the rift tore the galaxy in half, they did not shatter, they sharpened. Then, at last, the Lion returned. He did not come as a conqueror. He did not wear his pride like armour. He came as a man who had slept through an age of fire and awoke to find his sons buried beneath its ashes. He did not raise his voice. He did not rewrite the chapter. Instead, he offered them what they didn't know they needed: perspective. The Lion saw what the hunt had become, not a mission, but a prison. He didn't break it, he simply opened a path forward, one where the past would be remembered, but not chained to, one where the fallen would still be pursued, but with purpose, not penance. The Unforgiven adapted. They gathered, they judged themselves. They restructured not to erase shame, but to refine it into something useful. They accepted Primarch into their inner ranks, not as outsiders, but as torchbearers for what the chapter would become. And most of all, they unified. No longer were the successors fragmented shadows. Now, the Unforgiven stand as one entity, diverse in creed, but singular in purpose. The Fallen are still hunted, but the meaning has changed. It is no longer about redemption, it is about understanding, preventing, shaping what comes next. Because what comes next will not be kind. Cypher still walks the stars. Luthor's fate remains uncertain. The galaxy fractures more each decade, and in the silence between empires, ancient things stir. But this time, the First Legion does not hunt alone. They hunt with eyes open, swords drawn not just for punishment, but for preservation. Their secrecy is still their shield, their brotherhood still bound in silence, but now, behind the secrecy is not just shame, there is resolve. So who are the Dark Angels? They are the blade of the Emperor's original vision, tempered in loss and sharpened in secrecy. They are warriors not of absolution, but of responsibility. They do not ask for forgiveness, they do not seek praise. They exist where others fear to look, between damnation and duty. They are the Watchers in the Dark, they are the wrath of the First Legion, they are the Unforgiven, and they are not finished. You have received the sealed Vox communication of Dominissimo Voxlor. The hunt continues, the circle tightens, and the sins of Caliban echo louder with every broadcast. Swear your oath, strike the seal of subscription, join those who dare to walk the path of shadow, burden, and absolute silence. Until the next reckoning, trust in duty, not in truth. Question every brother, and remember, the First Legion does not forget.